Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Lighthouse Sessions. Today, I have my new friend, Mike Brcic, with me. And Mike broke the secret code of the show, so I will reveal that later. But, Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do? Because I have a funny feeling the phrase touch grass is very literal for you.
Mm, I love that. Can I start there and then I'll then I'll rewind?
Yes.
Um, yeah, it's interesting you say that. I just got back from co-leading an event in Iceland last week with my friend Philip McKernan, who was my co-facilitator on this event. And one of my, one of the methodologies that I use with my events is really immersing people in wilderness to a level that maybe they haven't experienced before. And it's this combination of real true wilderness, which is hard aspect, and immersion and silence. And so it's a very different experience to, for instance, go for a hike in a wild, remote part of Iceland with nobody else around, and doing that while talking with people and being on your phone and taking pictures. And it's another experience entirely where we say no phones, the phones stay behind, and we're going to do the first 2 hours of this walk in silence. And that's for some people, an extremely profound experience. And so the touching grass part of it, Iceland is covered in grass all over the place. And in this one particular hike that we did on top of this ridge, it was this really squishy moss, sort of combination of moss and grass. And like every 5 minutes, I found myself just wanting to reach down and just put my hand on the grass and touch it, because it's just so it's so tactile and beautiful, and it's just a reminder. One of my things in life is to really continue to develop and nurture a relationship with the wilderness, because I think there's something really important about that, both in terms of developing our connection to the natural world, but also in developing a connection to ourselves. And then when you spend enough time in that sort of profound relationship with wilderness, you realize you are not separate from this thing, and it's not scary. A lot of people are scared of the wilderness, right? But it's such an incredibly beautiful place to be. So that's what touching grass means to me, very literally and of course metaphorically. But to answer your question, I've been an entrepreneur for, amazing enough, in a couple of weeks it will be my 30-year anniversary of when I
Wow.
incorporated my first company, straight out of university. And that is, as any entrepreneurial journey, is full of twists and turns and plot twists and roller coasters and going upside down and all that kind of stuff. And
Sorry, Mike. I just got to say, I feel like there's a cliffhanger ending in there too for you as well, right?
yes. I mean, every day is a cliffhanger, right? I don't know what the next day is going to bring. It could bring beauty and joy. It could bring just another crisis. Who knows? But I think, one essential quality that I've developed through this journey is this understanding that, the things we might label crises or, struggles or challenges, each one of those is such a profound teacher and such a profound gift. And I'm actually just, I think, coming out of this 3-month period that started at the beginning of March, there was a lot of business challenges coming my way, on all fronts, and personal as well. And for the first month and a half, it was really grinding me, as like, it was a lot of like, what is happening here? But I've been through this enough times to be able to stop and slow down and say, hey, there's something really profound and interesting happening here for me, not just to me. And what is the lesson that I'm being asked to learn here? And so I think, the essential part of my journey is that I open myself up to that idea that everything is a teaching, particularly the most difficult aspects of our journey. And I like to think, because of that, I've learned a few things along the way about life and this crazy mystery of it all.
I love it. Now, I'm guessing when you first started Wayfinders, you were thinking, wow, this is a clever metaphor. And, it was about actually finding your way out in the wilderness. But something tells me you've long abandoned just the physical journey and you're seeing a deep inner journey. I'm fascinated. I'd love to see our people. And this is the code that Mike cracked. Spoiler alert, if you don't know this, almost every entrepreneur I've ever met, almost like 99.999, are either ADHD or autistic or both. We definitely sit on spectrums because we aren't meant to sit in classrooms and follow the rules like the rest of the world. Dr. Doug uses a phrase I think you'll relate to. He says we have a hunter's brain and we're always hypervigilant. So sometimes the hardest thing is silence.
Absolutely. You know, most of my events, if it's physically, geographically appropriate, we will take people out into the wilderness and we will drop them there on their own, anywhere from an hour to 24 hours. If we're doing 24 hours, we're leaving them with a tent and some water and stuff like that and whatnot. But even in as little as 1 hour, I've seen, people go into that kicking and screaming. And I remember when we told people that we were, the first time I did it, it was in Greenland. And I said, we're going out in the wilderness. I'm going to leave you on your own for 2 hours. And boy, oh boy, did people put up a lot of resistance. That like, that's crazy. You can't do this to me. Like, I paid you a lot of money to be here. Like, you can't do that. And then inevitably what happens, when we ring the bell, at 2 hours or 3 hours or 24 or whatever it is, people say, oh, that went really quick. Can we stay for longer? And the first hour or so is like really uncomfortable sitting with your thoughts and trying to be quiet because we all have busy brains. But for the driven, the visionary entrepreneurs that I work with, they rarely take time to stop and be in silence, and they don't have a very well-developed relationship with themselves and their soul and their heart and all these things. But then all it takes is a little bit of time slowing down. And just last week in Iceland, we did this, the first 2 hours of this hike in silence, and then we stopped on this ridge, and I had the group sit down, and we sat in silence with just the most remarkable vista you could imagine, anywhere on the planet, just for 20 minutes. And one of the guys there said to me, it was the first time in as long as he could remember, perhaps 20, 30 years, that he felt a feeling of peace and quiet and in his being. And that was just from 20 minutes of sitting there in silence. He said he couldn't remember ever feeling like that, like it had been decades since that, right? And it's just such a profound thing. Like, we have so much time where we can just be go, answer the next email, the next project, or whatever. 99.8% of your life can be like that. But you take that little bit of 0.2%, maybe it's just once a week or once a quarter, you go out for 2 days in the wilderness. And boy, oh boy, can that have a profound effect on you.
Well, I think you said something interesting very early in our conversation. You mentioned that a lot of people think we're disconnected. There's us and there's nature. And I'm sorry, but last time I checked, we were part of nature. Oddly, my kids and we were talking about Indigenous peoples this morning and their connection with Mother Earth. And it's like, life would be so much easier if we'd stopped trying to dominate the planet and started trying to be part of it. And so I'd love your thoughts on what people are seeing, because honestly, I would love to watch these entrepreneurs out there in the wild, because I'm sure, I'm guessing you take their devices away or they willingly put them somewhere. I think it'd be fascinating to watch them decompressing, because there's probably, I don't know, I'm going to guess an hour window where they're fidgety, twitchy, and then all of a sudden they finally realize, well, I can't do anything but sit here. So then nature starts to seep in. I think we all need a little bit more of that.
Yeah. Well, I've been blessed and fortunate to spend time with Indigenous people all over the planet, from the nomads of Western Mongolia to shamans in the Peruvian jungle to the Kogi people in Ecuador and other people. And what unites virtually every Indigenous society on the planet is that they have a profound relationship with the natural world. And I call it the myth of separation, right? Like we spend enough time in these urban environments and we develop this idea that we are completely separate from the natural world, from each other, all this kind of thing. If you want, there's many ways you can meet that. You can meet that on a spiritual level, you can meet that on a quantum physics level, but people from all sorts of different traditions will tell you that's simply not true. We are not separate. It's just a, it's just a fabrication of our mind. And I remember walking through the Peruvian Amazon with a local shaman, and this guy was so incredible. He spent 30 years of his life since he was a young boy training and learning before he felt he could call himself a shaman, before he felt he could use that term. And most people misunderstand, Amazonian shamans. They think it's all about ayahuasca and psychedelic plants or whatever. Really, it's just a lot of their time is spent training and understanding the relationship of all things. And so walking through the jungle with him is incredible. You could pick any leaf, any ant, any beetle, any creature, and he could tell you anything you need to know about the thing. But not only that thing in isolation, but its relationship to everything around it, how it fits into the ecosystem, the relationships it has with everything else around it, including himself. And so he did not see himself as separate from the jungle. He saw himself as a part of it, and simply just another expression of, this larger consciousness out there, which is such a more deeply comforting way to move through the world, understanding that you are just part of all of this great big beautiful mystery. You're not just this thing sitting separate from it. And when you live life like that, you develop a very different relationship to the natural world, to other people. Because if you live like that, for me to harm you, it would just feel like I'm harming myself in the process, right? Because we are just expressions of the same life force. Likewise with a tree or anything out there. And if you spend enough time in relationship with the natural world, you start to really feel that seep into your being. And if everyone, or if most people on the planet had that perspective, I think it would be a very different world we would inhabit.
I love that. And for what it's worth, I'm fascinated by the Buddhist tradition of do no harm. I think, when you, as you put it that way, if we're all connected, if I try to harm someone, I'm harming myself. That doesn't feel like a good idea. I'm fascinated because one of the crew members from the recent Artemis 2, looking down on Earth, I mean, arguably you can't get more distance from Earth than they were. And what fascinated me was they came back with this sense that we're all part of one big crew. And I think we needed that message. And my household, we're a bunch of space nerds, so we were all watching in fascination as this mission came to an end. But I'm fascinated that what they came back with, we're all connected. And I think that's, I'm fascinated by all the different experiences you and your people have had, because I'm going to guess you found more things in common as you explore than you found in different. And I think people tend to hyperfixate on, well, you have glasses, I don't, you wear a hat, I don't, we're not that different. We're very much the same.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't take very long in a group to be able to start to help people see these commonalities and these connections and whatever. And people can be, diametrically opposed in their beliefs or their political views or whatever. But then when you get people sharing their stories and their deeply human stories, we realize that we're all searching for the same thing. We're all struggling with the same things. And really what we're searching for is that experience of connection. Right? When we grew up as children, we felt this deep sense of connection with our parents, with the people around them. And then somewhere along the line, and I think psychologists will talk about around the age of 2 or 3, up until that point, children don't really see themselves as separate from their parents. They just sort of feel like they're part of one being. And then they start to develop this sense that, oh, wait a minute, this is a different person and I'm this. And then the world starts piling more messages on and, saying, oh, you're this or you're that or whatever. And then that myth of separation gets more and more convincing. And then at some point we have the wherewithal and the option to start to deconstruct that myth and start to see the commonalities, particularly amongst humans, right? A lot of these stories that divide us are simply stories. But I know I can sit down and it's incredible. Last March, I was leading an event in Papua New Guinea, and we were we were in this remote village, so so far. You have to take a plane to fly to one village, and then you have to take either a 2-hour boat ride or an 8-hour hike. We did the 8-hour hike to get to
Wow.
this village, and it's a village of about 200 people. One of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. It's such a beautiful place. But what makes Papua New Guinea so remarkable is that you have people living extremely different lives. Their lives are really not that much different from what they would have been 1,000 years ago. But because the missionaries were so active in Papua New Guinea, they spread English, throughout many of these communities, for better, for worse. That's not the point of the story. But a lot of the people in this village spoke English, and so we had we did this thing where we paired everybody up with one of the locals, and the locals were quite enthusiastic about this because they rarely get visitors. And they just went for a walk in the village, and the locals would, point out their house and their garden and say, "Oh, this is my child, and this is my uncle," and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And you can converse in English, and it was amazing, going for a walk with this man who was, maybe about 10 years younger than me, but lived such a completely different life than mine. But as we talk and we go deeper, and I asked him a little bit, like, what are your dreams? What are your hopes? What are your fears? It's like, he dreams about the same things I do, and he's worried about the same things I am, and we could see so much of ourselves in each other, even though our lives could not be more different. And
Wow.
And I've experienced that all over the world, right? People want the same thing. They want to be safe, they want to be loved, they want to love other people, they want to feel connected. All these things, and all of the other stories that are layered on top of that are just, they're just stories, and they're just mostly bullshit.
I love that. And for what it's worth, I think you and Dr. Doug, if you haven't had one of these deep philosophical conversations, you need to, because he spends a lot of his time, and I think this is what I'm hearing a lot, is bringing people, first of all, back into connection with themselves, and which I think is the thing we lose, ironically, when we first come up with the illusion that this is me, I'm myself. We are losing connection with the greater good in the universe. But then I think we also lose that connection with others.
Yeah, I think those two things are very much intertwined and interrelated, and it's hard to develop a deep connection with somebody else if you don't have a connection with yourself, right? If you don't know, and having a connection with yourself, to me, it just comes down to trusting yourself, trusting who you are at your core, trusting yourself to make decisions in your own interest, rather than all these competing, voices and interests, whatever. Actually understanding who you are and trusting that. And it's hard to have, real and proper and deep connections with others if you can't trust yourself, if you can't trust your own inner voice, your judgment, whatever. And then you will seek out relationships for convenience or transactional, or help me not feel lonely for an evening or something like that, rather than, I know who I am at my core. I know who the people are that I want in my life. I know the people I feel safe around. I know the people that I want to make feel safe and that I want to love, and that kind of stuff. And that's a very different relationship than when you are, this confused mess of who the hell am I? And, should I hang out with these people or this person, or, that. So they're very much intertwined, and I think the two can support each other. As for me, I've undergone a profound shift over the last 5 years in terms of, my kids are now in their mid to late teens. And for so much of my life as a parent, my circle, and we had 3 kids in short order. We had a 2-year-old when our twins were born. And
oh my God.
So, yeah, intense, as you can imagine, right? And so our sphere, our circle really shrank. It was like going anywhere far, visiting a friend across town or whatever. It's just too much trouble. It's like, okay, our circle became the neighborhood and the other parents in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And over the last 5 years of they've aged, I've realized a lot of these relationships were relationships of convenience. We didn't really have a lot of common. I didn't feel great around them. I don't think they felt great around me. And so it's like reorienting that. And like, who do I want to spend my time with? And as I start to align around these other people, they tell me something valuable about myself in the process, and that supports my own relationship with myself. And so it's sort of a feedback circle, if you can imagine. Positive one.
I love that. And for what it's worth, I can relate when we spaced ours out because there was no way I was going to be outnumbered. And I was terrified. No twins in our family, but I was like, I don't think I could handle twins. So I applaud you, my friend.
Thank you.
We spaced ours out. They're about 4 years apart. And I think it was perfect for us. But you're right. The universe suddenly became play dates around, school groups and things like that. I think it's funny to see kids now. I was one of those parents. I thought, oh, I have lots to teach my kids. No idea how much they were going to teach me. And believe it or not, I learned presence from them because I was watching them. And I'll share a story I think you'll find amusing, and you can laugh at me for this. I spent a lot of my life looking for inner peace. I was traveling the world, looking high and low. I followed mentors. I had gurus. I had all kinds of people in my life. And then one day I found it and I went, oh, crap. It was right where I wasn't looking. Like, that moment. And my wife's like, you sound like you're in pain right now. And I said, oh, I am, because I just figured out that inner peace is not a destination. It's something. And it's hard to explain to people who've not found it, because as you said, if you don't have a good relationship with yourself, how can you hope to have a good relationship with someone else?
Yeah. Particularly an intimate partner, I think, as well, right? It's an intimate partnership, marriage, whatever relationship you want to call it. If you are willing to pursue that at a level of depth that will create, a really profound connection, you're going to confront all sorts of things about yourself in the process. And if you and you'll get triggered and all these kind of things. And if you're not willing to embrace that as a journey, like, hey, there's something profound this relationship is teaching me about myself. What can I learn? What can I heal? What can I, how can I grow in this process? Well, that relationship will probably be very agonizing, because you'll just see it as a source of stress. But if you approach it, our intimate partners know us better than anybody, perhaps better than we know ourselves. And if you approach that from a perspective of this person who just regularly fucking pisses me off every day, this is actually my most profound teacher. And she or he is like offering me a gift every single day to learn something about myself. And it doesn't mean you excuse, bad behavior or whatever, but it is a mirror with which you can look inward instead of always, pointing the finger at the other person. And my personal finding and experience is that the more I turn the mirror on myself and look inward, the more peaceful things get, and the more of an invitation that is for my partner to do the same. But if I'm pointing the finger at my partner, she's probably going to get a little bit defensive about that. She's going to dig in her heels. She's going to start pointing the finger back at me. But if I just, I think we can all resonate with that, right? But if I am willing to accept this as my most profound journey of growth and my most profound teacher, boy, oh boy, there's so much beauty and growth that can come out of the process. And that becomes, a gentle invitation for the other person to do the same.
Yeah. It's funny because I've talked to many enlightened people in my day, and I asked them all the same question, and you can guess where I was when I asked the question. I would always say, how can I help my wife and my kids be less stressed? How can I help them? And the answer was always this really annoying, work on yourself. And I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm working on myself. And they'd be like, no, there's no and. That is the answer. And now it has been amazing. Kids are naturally smart at this stuff. We break them somehow, not intentionally, but as society, watching my kids as I get more peaceful inside, they're naturally more peaceful as well. And even with my wife, it's fascinating to watch her, because things that used to stress her out, now she'll just look at me and start laughing. And so we laugh a lot at the ridiculousness of things that we think are ourselves, when the reality is most of the time, if we're not triggered, if we're at peace, we don't care what's going on around us.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing how that can radiate outward, right? When you are actually embracing that journey and you are willing to figure out whatever it is that's going to bring you to that place of more calm and peace. And I spent I've been to Bhutan 3 times, and I'm heading back this October. And Bhutan is this tiny little Himalayan kingdom, very Buddhism infuses everything they do there, including their governance. Maybe you've heard of the concept of gross national happiness, but that is something
Yes.
that's something that was pioneered in Bhutan. And it's not. It sounds like it's probably a bumper sticker, but it's actually their entire policy framework and how the government runs its country is based on that. Eight very significant principles, all of which are informed by Buddhism, from education to health to you name it. And there are thousands of there are many monasteries around the country, and thousands of monks living in these monasteries. Usually they're high up on these mountains for seclusion. And if a monk is, and usually they start young and they go to kind of like a monk university, and then when they, or a monk school, I mean, and then if they're serious about their practice, they'll go live at a monastery. And if they're really serious, then they'll commit to the path, which is they go into seclusion. And usually they will go into seclusion for 3 years, 3 years in which they have no contact with the outside world. Somebody, brings them food and leaves it outside their door, but they have no contact. And during that time, they're simply meditating and praying. They don't have books, they don't have phones, they don't have laptops, whatever. They're simply eating and meditating and praying. And they pray for the well-being of all sentient beings. And it's this incredible experience to be in this country where there are literally, at any given time, hundreds or thousands of monks up on these hillsides who are just meditating and being calm and praying for everyone's well-being. And so I've spent time with these monks, and some of them have gone into seclusion for as long as 9 years, which you think, like, that's impossible. How can anybody do that, right? We would call that solitary confinement or cruel and unusual punishment. But some of the most peaceful, most radiant, most joyful human beings I've ever met on the planet, these monks. And then you spend time in their presence, and you can just feel your nervous system relax, and you can feel everything slow down and calm down around them, and you want to feel that for yourself. And so I've been there 3 times. None of those times have I come home and saying, you know what, I think I'm going to become a monk. But every time I've come back from there, it's just been a little reminder of the power of stillness and of just being. And it's a reminder that I don't always have to be doing. And I think as entrepreneurs, we develop this inner belief that if I'm not doing and if I'm not achieving, then I'm worthless. What good am I? And I remember when I sold my previous company, I had to force myself for a period of 6 months not to start anything new and not to do a new thing, because I knew it was going to be valuable for me to quiet that. And boy, were those first 3 months really uncomfortable. I'd wake up in the morning with not much to do, and the internal voice was like, you're wasting your life, you're a waste of space or whatever. Like, why don't you get out there and start doing something and making something, creating something? And I really had to counter that voice. It was just saying, you're okay just the way you are, just slow down. Just by the fact of slowing down and being a little more peaceful, that's probably one of the most valuable things you can do for yourself, for your kids, for your partner, whatever, for the world. So anyway, just wanted to share that story.
I love that. And I think that's our visionary types. We tend to rush project to project. And sometimes we burn the building down while we're still in it, while rushing to the next project. And I'm seeing the most successful people I know, they all went into some form of self-imposed isolation and came back calmer. And it is amazing when people find their true selves, they move faster, they have bigger impact, and they lose all of the grind culture that we all seem to cherish. and yet they somehow have a bigger impact. So um, I love that. Now you have a community, so Wayfinders is about travel, but it's also about a community. So how can people learn more about you and Wayfinders, and maybe follow along on some of your adventures? And I know there's a wait list to be on the adventures, but how do people get on that list?
Yeah. If you go to way-finders.com, there's all sorts of information there about our approach and the different adventures that we have. And there's one of the things we just launched this year is what we call immersions. And so they're kind of a little bit more bite-sized version of what we do. So you don't have to travel, 28 hours in a plane and spend 10 days in the wilderness of Mongolia to access a little bit of what we do. And you go there, it's, there's a little thing at the bottom. You can join the mailing list and get notified when we launch new things and stuff like that. So different ways to hop in.
Awesome. And I think if it serves, I'd love to have you back on the show at some point and hear some of your other adventures. It's amazing how quickly time goes when we start recording. So
Yeah.
what's been your favorite destination? Yes, I'm asking you to name your favorite. You've been to a lot of places. What's been your most impactful destination, and what about it caused that big impact for you?
Mm-hmm. I'll answer that if you tell me your favorite child.
Fair touche.
No. I do have an answer. I do have an answer to that. But it is a little bit like having to choose my favorite child, because every single destination, every single event brings me something different, but something profound and amazing, and I take away such gifts from each one of them. But if I am actually answering the question, and I'm answering it truthfully, then I would have to say Uganda, and particularly a region in southwestern Uganda. It's called Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, and it's this incredible dense jungle that's home to half of the world's mountain gorillas. And we when I go there, and I've done 2 events there, I'll go back for a third in a couple of years, I think. We have this incredible lodge staffed with locals from the area, just a beautiful lodge, and it sits on this ridge. And looking out over one side, you can look down into Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, this thick jungle, and you can hear the sounds of the jungle. And it's incredible to sit there and know that in this vast jungle that you see, that there are hundreds of mountain gorillas down there, and there's all these other creatures living in this jungle. And then you look in the other direction, and it's the Virunga Mountains, and it's this string of volcanoes that sort of straddles the Uganda, Rwanda, DRC borders, and they're massive. They're like 16,000 feet. These incredible volcanoes, and the sun sets behind the volcanoes, and it's just the most magical thing. But what makes it even more magical is I've developed these relationships with locals there, particularly with the Batwa people. And the Batwa people, they were the residents of Bwindi Impenetrable Forest when it was turned into a national park in 1991. The gorillas were going extinct because of poaching and other factors, and the gorillas have been an amazing success story. I think their numbers have doubled or tripled since then. But the story that doesn't get told is there was 200 or 300 Batwa living in the jungle when they created the national park, and they told them to get out, and the government gave them this laughably small piece of land and said, "Here you go, you can farm here." And the Batwa are like, "Farming? What is farming? We live on bushmeat." Yeah, we live on bushmeat and fruit and whatnot. And so they've had a real struggle since being kicked out of there. And so I have this on, every time I go back, including my first visit when I went there to do some scouting, my relationship with them goes a little bit deeper, and I'm supporting. I and my clients are supporting their efforts at self-determination through, we're buying them land, we're buying them tools, stuff like that. And and they are some of the most joyful. They're just constantly dancing and singing, and it's incredible being in their presence. So that's my long answer to your question.
That is a fabulous question, and I feel like that's where Diane Fossey was with Gorillas in the Mist. Is that? I think some of that.
She was just a little bit about 15 miles south of there on the Rwanda side of the border.
Yes, yeah.
And I've been to her gravestone there.
Wow. That's she's one of my wife's all-time favorite human beings. And I watched Gorillas in the Mist, didn't know anything about the background, and man, she was a badass, like fighting for nature. Basically, it was amazing how passionate she was.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, I could talk to you all day, but I promised you I'd let you back to your life well ahead of the top of the hour. So I want to thank you for hanging out with me and with my audience. And I look forward to learning more and hearing more about your adventures around the globe.
Yeah. Thank you for the conversation. I look forward to our paths crossing again soon.